organization based out of Denver, Colorado. We also have an office in Petersburg, Virginia, but a lot of our projects actually take place in California, so your state is near and dear to our hearts. And our director of operations just got back from a number of site visits out there. So I'm looking forward to learn more about that and where we're going to be going in 2019. We are actually wrapping up in Bodie State Historic Park this week, which is very exciting. And essentially, a quick breakdown of our program is that we are a workforce for saving places. We engage volunteers, students, and veterans to do the hands-on preservation work needed to save and sustain historic buildings and structures for public benefit. We work all across the country. We have not yet been national, but we did take a dip into Puerto Rico not too long ago. So with that, let's see here. Okay, so a lot of our projects, when we originally started, a lot of our projects were on public lands, so thinking national forests, national parks, and state agencies, working with those guys, and a lot of them took place in absolutely spectacular areas. They still do, and we are expanding more into urban environments and places at lower elevations than this one right here. So this information, since we've started our 2018 season, this is slightly out of date now. We do have a lot more volunteer hours. We're about halfway through our 2018 season. We have more than 240 projects right now. A lot of the way that we work is kind of a step on, step off model, where we will bring our mobile preservation truck and trailer, and our volunteer crews will meet us on site to accomplish something within a defined time frame. So usually it's going to be a week to about a month's worth of work. So one thing that, in terms of volunteer management, a lot of folks, especially those from the general public that don't have a background in preservation, one thing that I really focus on is trying to engage them in the reason for why historic preservation. It's something that is frequently seen as being a little bit beyond the public's understanding or engagement. And so what we're trying to do is really engage more members of the public in the preservation of our shared history. So I really focus on the community resource aspect and preserving things for future generations. Our first project was in 2009. We are a pretty young organization, and we originally started with kind of single day or 2-day like weekend projects to accommodate volunteer schedules, especially as we were just starting. Since then, we've been able to really grow a whole model built around a week-long commitment. So volunteers will join us for a week, sometimes multiple weeks in a row, to help us on a project because they so enjoy the work, they so enjoy the location, and being part of that preservation crew. So one thing that I get asked about, especially from people who aren't sure why we would use volunteers for something that's perceived to be so technical, or something that requires significant training, significant education, is that we mostly focus on the maintenance and repair aspect of preservation. We choose projects that are appropriate for volunteers. You won't see us working on the Biltmore Estate, for example, but there are plenty of log cabins in the woods that we need to work on. So by teaching volunteers the traditional building and preservation trades, we engage them very, very viscerally in the preservation of these buildings, right? We inspire people to care about it, but we don't just inspire them as though it's kind of this intellectual thing. We actually train them how to do something about it. We empower them to do this. So that's a huge benefit of using volunteers, is that we're actually growing our own preservation workforce. For project partners, with that matching volunteer labor value, it does make it easier to gain funding for preservation projects that do engage volunteers. So there's that very pragmatic portion of it as well. And then getting back to the ethic of preservation, historic buildings and structures need their communities need their historic buildings and structures. We're symbiotic. And then as we're engaging volunteers to again, preserve places within their own community or within their own state. We're preserving not only the building, of course, but also contributing to community well-being, camaraderie, culture, a deeper understanding of our own shared history. I use that phrase quite a lot. So I'll share a little bit about the structure of our crew. This is kind of our standard workforce makeup. You can see it's a pretty small crew. We do have a dog here, which is permitted by the project partner in this case. This is down in southern Colorado. We had 6 volunteers. We had a project supervisor, and he is responsible for the quality of the product at the end of the day. He does a lot of the training, and he or she will do most of the direction on the project as well. And then our crew leader is responsible for supporting the project supervisor and is also our camp chef. So you heard that right. We do provide meals for all volunteers in our projects, and they are free to join. So we do have that going for us. We don't just work with members of the general public. We work with corps or organized groups as well. For example, the Rocky Mountain Youth Corps. And these are kind of strategic partnerships in that we want to engage youth. We want to train really the next generation of preservationists. And also some of these places that we get to work in are wild and remote, very, very physically challenging, and really a great fit for young men and women who want to get out there, get their hands dirty, and are up for the challenge. So we've worked, like I said, all across the country. This is one of our most famous projects. We have been here several years in a row. I think we're just wrapping up our 6th now. And on this project, it's very well known because we frequently partner students and veterans. So people who are exploring a new career or transitioning from life in the military to a career in historic preservation, we're able to offer them stipends through our partnerships with the National Forest. And we put them on a crew with volunteers from the general public, many of whom already have skills. So there is kind of that cross-generational learning that goes on, which is a wonderfully positive thing when your goal is to really build culture and community and camaraderie. We also partner with other groups where we'll provide the technical, kind of the technical leadership, the project management, but the other partner that we work with, they provide the workforce. In this case, it's with the Passport in Time program of the U.S. Forest Service. So we engage with Passport in Time volunteers, and they made up the crew, and then we provided the project management and the technical supervision. These are some other projects. I just love this contrast where we have the idea of we have fraternity brothers working on the George Washington Carver Schoolhouse in Neosho, Missouri. Carver is one of their community brothers, or one of their fraternity brothers. So they came and they brought their community to this project, and they just made it happen. And that story and that connection to the ethic of preservation and community is just incredible. On the other side, on the right hand, we have volunteers from Texas, Indiana, and North Carolina in a Wyoming wilderness who are learning from each other and trying something totally new. And so they're creating a whole new community and developing a sense of connection to one of the early things, one of the early dude ranches in the wilderness out here in the West. So our program does not restrict based on skill level or age unless you're under 14 without a parent or guardian, or where you're coming from, income level, anything like that. Our program is free to join. No prior experience is necessary, and we provide all meals, tools, training, and equipment, and either a campsite or occasionally indoor lodging, usually bunkhouse style. We frequently partner with youth serving organizations, with schools, with other community groups, and it's all free. So a big part of our program, and the reason that we've been successful, is that we make preservation work as accessible as possible. If it's perceived as being something that's too difficult to do, or too inaccessible for any reason, that would limit our success. So we're always trying to make it more and more accessible. So this is our setup on any given work crew. We have a heavy duty work truck and trailer. They go down these really crazy roads. You wouldn't believe it. That carries all of our tools and equipment, and that's everything from a generator to a concrete mixer. It's about anything they'd need for their season in the field. It carries the personal protective equipment. We want everybody to be safe. Our field kitchen equipment, and you'll see this canvas wall tent over here, and that's our standard setup for a field kitchen. It may look a little primitive, but we can whip up some pretty good meals in there. We have one project supervisor, one crew leader, and then the crew. Usually the crew's about 4 to 8 people given the project. So our volunteers will join us for generally about a week, usually arrive on Sunday evening and depart on Friday afternoon. We'll start with breakfast, a safety circle, we'll stretch to warm up, we'll have an orientation, we'll talk about why this building is important, what we're gonna do to preserve it for future generations. And then people will be assigned a task for the day. We'll take lunch and snack breaks, get to know each other, and we'll eat dinner together. And then it's time for stories around the campfire, taking a dip in the lake, going on a hike, or participating in a guided activity led by a project partner. So somebody from the State Historic Park, the Forest Service archaeologist, whoever is there and ready to engage with our volunteers. So we really do try to make it not just about the hard physical labor, but also about the also trying to give a deeper understanding and a deeper connection to the site. This is a project we worked on for several years. Very, very, very difficult access. It's up a scree slope at about 11,000 feet, and you need a 4-wheel drive truck to get down that road before you even start your hour hike up in the morning. So for that reason, it took quite a long time, and it was a masonry project, so we're carrying masonry supplies up this slope. We love to, if we can find old photos and contrast our volunteers in the same situation, it's incredible marketing, of course. And it's also, again, going back to that theme of deepening the connection to the place and to the history there. So we just got to wrap that project up last year. And if you like, I'll share with you some final photos. We've worked with national parks. This is in Death Valley last year. We're working almost exclusively with Adobe on this project. Generally, the best sorts of volunteer projects for us are those that are technically easy to learn with practice and guidance and require a lot of hours of labor. So working with Adobe and building an Adobe wall is, forming the Adobe is a great volunteer activity. But with something as monotonous as this, it's important that the people who are managing the project on the ground know how to mix it up, keep it interesting, and make sure that volunteers feel the connection and don't just get kind of bored. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. So just another sample of projects that we've done around the country with various project partners. You can see there are a number of Civilian Conservation Corps things that we've done. You'll see that more. Lookout towers are always great, and they provide incredible photos, of course. But yeah, the diversity of projects that we can work on is pretty unlimited. If it's appropriate for volunteers, then we're able to provide the project management. We do the hiring of the project supervisors, so our technical leads on the project, and the recruitment of the volunteers. And we work really closely with the project partner to make sure that things are done according to their expectations within the time frame that we can provide. This is showing the access, all the different ways that we have gotten into sites. So again, going back to that diversity and the flexibility of our program, we've used barges, mule trains, float planes, helicopters occasionally, and just regular hiking in with buckets of stuff. So this is another project. We're returning to this one again this year. The wilderness projects do tend to be pretty popular because they're so unique. We're using only hand tools. There's no gasoline, there's no electricity. So we really are taking a step back in time and building in the way that the original builders would have. Okay, so moving forward with this, it's a lot of showcase of some of our projects for 2018. As you can see, we're working all across the country. Got a couple California projects here on the right. And one thing that we are always sharing with our volunteers is, of course, that preservation ethic, like why preservation. And when we receive feedback or we receive quotes from our volunteers that the light bulb went off, you know, the moment really clicked, is that this is valuable, this is important. And they realize that without them, without the volunteers there to do this work, a lot of these things would have just gone to waste or rotted away, because so many of the public agencies or the organizations that are responsible for these buildings, they don't have the money, they don't have the time, they don't have the workforce. And so that's kind of what we can provide. Okay, so nearing the end of my presentation here, I do invite you to check out our website, and I'll throw up a link to sign up for our mailing list as well. If you like, you're welcome to register for Historicorps projects online, and then our newsletter and project announcement mailing list. So I should mention, which I forgot to earlier, is that a lot of preservation students or people who are currently in the field of historic preservation will join our projects for an experience that's otherwise somewhat difficult to come by, and that is that hands-on training. So in our projects, we list the scope of work. We might be doing carpentry, masonry, timber framing, you know, whatever the building requires. And volunteers or students can choose to go on a project that develops skills that they're particularly interested in. So that is an aspect of our program that is especially of interest to students and current preservationists. Okay, so again, that's my boss's email, but you can switch it out for L. Rice. But yeah, that's about it of that. And I do have a video that I'd like to share with you. So let me tee that up here, and I'm happy to take questions as well, which I will try to answer. I can now, or I'll take them later.
Hey Liz, just one final thing. I'm noticing a bit of pixelation, and it may help if you first disable your webcam, which will reduce the bandwidth, and then play the video after you disable the webcam.
Okay, I did that.
Great.
Cool. Okay, just a minute here. Okay, so this video was taken as part of a campaign that we undertook over the past couple of years. It's still in development, which is a video or a series of videos that highlights the work that Historicorps does with its project partners across the country, how we do what we do, and how we're engaging the public in preservation, in the act of preservation. So this is still underway. I think we're going to be able to show it on Wyoming PBS this year. So join our mailing list and we'll be able to let you know when that happens. Okay, so here we go. Jonathan, if the sound is not working, feel free to just speak up and I'll pause it and we'll see what we can do.
Great, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Across America, there are many remote, historically significant structures that once lay in disrepair, but are now being restored to their original condition. I'm Townie Anderson, Executive Director of Historicorps. We're the folks who engage volunteers in the preservation of historic structures on public lands. Mining complexes, fire lookout towers, log barns, iconic lodges of the North Woods, and early ranches of the Wild West all tell a vivid story of our past, and when preserved, can teach us how to create our future. This is the mission of Historicorps, a small but mighty nonprofit organization dedicated to engaging volunteers in the preservation of threatened buildings on public lands.
History has always spoke to me. Old buildings always spoke to me. In a way, it's always been in my blood. My name is John Rossi, and I'm a project supervisor with Historicorps.
My name is Charlotte Helmer, and I'm a crew leader with Historicorps.
My name is Patrick Kennedy. I'm a project supervisor for Historicorps.
My name's Dane Cowan. I'm a project supervisor for Historicorps.
My name is Jonathan Williams, and I'm a project supervisor with Historicorps.
In its first 6 seasons, 1,500 Historicorps volunteers, veterans, students, and youth corps have logged nearly 100,000 hours to save over 200 historic sites in 24 states.
Good job, everybody. Good job.
We travel to America's remote and beautiful public lands where historically significant buildings and structures are in desperate need of repair and restoration.
We go to places like the Golconda Mining Complex, located deep in the Rockies.
Forest Lodge in the Great North Woods.
The George Washington Carver School in Neosho, Missouri.
Simpson Lake Lodge, Wyoming Wilderness.
Eagle Lake Community Kitchen in Oregon.
Truth be told, there are over 30,000 of these historic structures across America.
Each of them has an incredible story to tell, and that story is an important part of our history.
The problem is that they're falling down, rotting apart, collapsing. They are on life support. In fact, we are the life support.
So we come in and really save them. We're like preservation superheroes. Otherwise, they will be gone.
Volunteers are the lifeblood of Historicorps. They form the work teams we lead.
So this was my first time getting to play with mud as a building material. It was awesome. So you just splat it in, and you kind of squish it in with your fingers, and then you get a little extra water and smooth it out. They could pay for this whole restoration if they called it like a spa treatment.
My name is Doug. I'm from a small town, Arcadia, 15 miles east of Los Angeles. I'm a retired engineer, and I think this is my 6th or 7th Historicorps that I've done starting around 2010. I'm 76 years old and feeling great, and anybody my age should not hesitate to come do this. And I'm getting wet.
So we represent the men of Phi Beta Sigma fraternity, and we thought that this would be a perfect time, since George Washington Carver is one of our fraternity brothers, to help restore or preserve the school that he attended.
So when we began, our first order of business was just to remove all that century of wrapping and expose the school, and that's what we've got now. My wife's a retired 4th grade school teacher, and she tells me, she said, wouldn't it be great if I could bring my class down and sit them on the little benches in the room where George Washington Carver went to school and teach a lesson on diversity, on racial harmony, on history. And so that's our goal, is to do right by history. We can tell the story the way it ought to be told.
Without volunteers, Historicorps wouldn't exist, and these buildings wouldn't be saved. That's why it's important that it becomes a learning experience for volunteers. They go away with a better appreciation for these structures and an understanding of how they were built and what it takes to restore them.
We literally work on all types of buildings. Log structures are really sweet, especially when we start with an actual tree and hand hew it into a log to replace another that was deteriorated.
We restore a lot of stone walls, fireplaces, floors, and foundations. That's where we get into meticulous masonry work using century-old mortar recipes.
We even repair historic metal structures, like those fire towers you find at the top of a lone peak. That was pretty freaky being up there, I'm not gonna lie.
We have to adhere to the Secretary of the Interior standards for historic restoration, which means sourcing original materials and in wilderness areas using the same hand tools used in the original construction.
That requires a certain set of restoration skills from a highly trained professional, like myself, to get the job done.
Cutting through these logs, we found a beetle and some larvae in this log in particular. And we think this log may have come from a different forest, and it's really starting to decompose.
One of the more satisfying aspects of this work is teaching others how to use these tools.
We don't just preserve the buildings. We honor the men and women who built the buildings in the first place when we preserve those skills they used for the construction.
You know, Patrick is considered one of the best restoration woodmen in the world.
I'm far from the best. We have a lot of all-stars on our team, but I have been at it for 40 years.
In addition to being a crew leader, I also work on planning future projects. This summer I hiked more than 100 miles through the Oregon Cascade and Wallowa Mountains and assessed 15 historic backcountry sites so we could triage them for future restoration.
We've got 6 teams in the field from April to September, and each team handles 3 to 5 projects per season, restoring upwards of 30 critical projects a year.
And I guess you could say we are a little competitive.
Just a little?
Okay, very competitive, but that never hurt anyone.
My specialty are the backcountry wilderness projects. I mean way back there, where we might not see another soul for a month.
These projects can present many hurdles. Just getting there can be challenging. We've brought in volunteers and equipment via 4-wheel drive vehicles, horse packing or mule trains, float planes, jet boats, ATVs, and more often just the old-fashioned way, long hikes with packs on our backs.
There are often concerns about the weather, the altitude, lightning, possible forest fires, wild animals that could pose a danger, and every damn bug that bites.
Howdy, I'm Jonas Landis with Historicorps. I'm the Director of Operations. Those adverse conditions that we are exposed to are one of the draws of what we do. It's an opportunity for people to experience the awe-inspiring forces of nature firsthand, and not behind the screen, not behind a desk, but right there, feeling the wind in their face and snow on their backs.
Honestly, I think sometimes these very obstacles are what attract a large number of our volunteers. There is a great sense of satisfaction and rich camaraderie that develops amongst a group of like-minded individuals when they work together to restore an important historic structure against the odds.
Sometimes the volunteers are restored just as much as the buildings we're working on. But it's as much about working on the project as it is the adventure. We have to work together as a team within a tight schedule, or it's not going to be a success.
I'm there because the project has to happen. My commitment is to get the job done.
Yep, it's got to get done. It's not always easy, and it's not for everybody, but it's what sets us apart.
Well, actually, get it done, but also get it done right. There are no second chances. What we do is equal parts exhilarating and exhausting, thrilling and nerve-wracking, but ultimately really, really important. I mean, we are preserving pieces of history.
Some people ask, why is it important to protect and preserve historic buildings like Cork Ranch? It's important for people to see the physical structure, not to see just a mark on the ground where it used to be, where they can come, they can experience it in all the senses. They can see it, they can touch it, they can smell it, they can feel the wind and the whole experience of being out here in the remoteness. And it's that kind of authenticity that helps connect people to the past and make them really understand what it would have been like to settle the Wild West.
Okay. Well, that is that, and I've paused sharing my screen. I love that video because I think it gives a pretty good overview of what we do, where we go, and the men and women that lead our projects. So I know there's a lot that I probably haven't covered in that kind of quick overview of the organization and how we use volunteers, how we engage them in the preservation of our own history. I'm happy to take questions, and I know that we'll be covering them at the end.
Great. Thank you, Liz. And that was perfect timing because Cindy Heitzman is now logged in, and I'm going to try to unmute her as well. Cindy, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Great. So this presentation was going to be split into 2 logical parts, and part 2 is actually CPF's opportunity to tell you how we manage volunteers and work with volunteers. And I think it's a different sort of scenario than Historicorps, and Liz makes it look incredibly easy. But I think in our case, we're a small nonprofit of 3 staff members, and we don't benefit from someone like Liz, who is a full-time volunteer manager. And so we as staff are often tasked with managing and recruiting and retaining volunteers. So what I'm going to do right now is share the slides, and Cindy, I'm guessing you can follow along and chime in as we're mentioning things.
I will.
Great. Okay. So you can see the screen? Great. So just to get started, just to give you a little bit of background about CPF and what we do, I'm sure most of you are familiar with our programs, and many of you are probably familiar with our advocacy efforts. But behind the scenes, we rely on a large group of volunteers, and most of what we do couldn't get done without the active support of volunteers. And each year we probably deal with upwards of 300 volunteers between the three of us. And just a quick introduction to the three staff members at CPF. Cindy Heitzman, who's here today, logged in from Palm Springs, California, is the executive director, and she's been with CPF since 2004. I am the field services director, and Andrew Schaefer, who's not here today, but he is the membership and development manager. He's also down there with Cindy, recruiting and managing volunteers at this moment. So maybe Cindy, you can talk a little bit about why you're down there and what sort of efforts we're involved with right now.
Sure. Well, I'm down here because we are holding our 2019 conference in Palm Springs. And our annual conference is our biggest fundraiser of the year. It's our biggest educational offering of the year. And it's also the time when we utilize our volunteer pool the most. We have the greatest number of volunteers, the greatest need for this event. We recruit over 100 speakers every year, and every one of them volunteer to work at the conference. We have a team of committee members, two committees, our steering committee or our planning committee and the program committee, and each has anywhere from 15 to 30 people. And so that was our purpose of coming down here today, was to kick that off and to begin the recruitment for volunteers, both in terms of people who will serve on the planning, the program committee, and people who can volunteer to help with the logistics and other aspects of the conference. So that's why we're here. And it takes a better part of a year to do this, to plan this event, and it's all done by volunteers, except for the 3 staff members. So all total, we have about, I'd say, close to 200 people that help us with this one event, start to finish, the better part of a year. So that was my purpose here today. We've started out by putting out feelers to our partners and asking them for information on who can help. And as the year progresses, we will begin to get commitments. We can't get commitments too early because people's lives change and their demands change, and what they said they could do today may not happen by the time the conference rolls around. So this is what we're doing. We achieve this, as I said. In fact, what we do is we achieve almost every aspect of our organizational goals and mission through the use of volunteers in one capacity or another, from our board on down to people who with the conference, set up, clean up, you name it. So pardon the background noise. I'm sitting at the conference hotel and had to find a quiet place. So anyway, that's why I'm down here, is to help with this event.
Great, good summary. What I have up on the screen now is just a breakdown of all of the various volunteer positions that we rely on. And if you're ever interested in volunteering with CPF, you can go to our website and click on how you can help. There's a very quick application to be a volunteer. Generally, where we usually need the most help is the conference, and it's quite a logistical challenge, and Cindy manages a lot of that. For each conference, we usually have, in terms of event support, a range of 20 to 30 volunteers. Is that right, Cindy?
That's right.
And then on top of that, we're managing 100+ speakers just for the conference. And my position at CPF also manages a number of other events throughout the year. We do upwards of 100 events each year, everything from rooftop history tours to bus tours to workshops and webinars and any sort of educational event outside of the conference, all of which provide continuing education units. And so really what makes the organization work from a program standpoint are its speakers, its volunteers, and many of those I manage throughout the year. And I think because this webinar is about how to manage and how to work with so many volunteers, we'll talk a little bit about how we've done that with a small staff. So usually with event support, and I categorize this under event support because each event relies on both speakers and people who help with registration and check-in and things like that. Many of these volunteers are trained directly on site, and they're typically familiar with what we do. They usually provide support more than once a year, so it's typically easier to train event support volunteers on the spot. And you know, it's typically the only event that we have training prior to the event is the conference. And maybe Cindy, you can talk a little bit about how the volunteer training process works prior to the conference. If you're still there. We may have lost Cindy. Oh.
Volunteer Center of Orange County.
Oh, you're back. Okay. All right. So, so maybe you can describe a little bit about how you train volunteers prior to the conference and what sort of process is involved in that.
Sure. Yeah, we put out a call for volunteers. It's on our website, so we do this throughout the year. But about 2 to 3 weeks before the event, we've confirmed the volunteers, and we do a training. And we used to do this in person. We used to travel to wherever the conference was and ask the volunteers to come, but we found it more effective and just more efficient to do it online. So we schedule 2 online training programs, much like what we're doing today. And we do the training, but before we do the training, we send out a packet of information so people can read up on it, so they come into the meeting prepared, so we don't waste their time. But what is really important for conference volunteers, or any volunteer for that matter within our organization, is to very clearly let them know what's expected of them. Date, how long, the duration of the commitment, and what's involved. So, and what do they get out of it? So with the conference volunteer, for example, we have different jobs. They'll have different assignments: a special event, a session, cleanup, setup, AV tech, and we have a job description for them. It's very concise. It's less than 1 page, and we will tell them what that job means and how many volunteers we need and what date. So communicating to the individual what is expected of them and how long is really, really important. And we get people who will sign up for that. And then if we find that we have gaps, we have to go out and recruit people to kind of fill the gaps. We end up creating sign-in sheets so that when people come in for the conference, they sign in and they sign out. So we know when they're here, who showed up. And it's really important also to have someone on site who's dedicated to manage them when they're coming on site. So they can tell us someone didn't show up, or someone had to go home sick, whatever the situation. It's always important that we have a real clear line of communication, start to finish, when we're telling them and recruiting them to actually at the event. We always include contact information so they can pick up a phone, a cell phone, and get a hold of someone. So we have to identify that point person on the event, who to contact. So it's, you know, it's very, communication is extremely important. We also ask the volunteers to sign a commitment form, indicating that they understand what's expected of them, that as a volunteer, they're representing the organization. So we ask that they dress appropriately. It's a conference, so something casual is fine, comfortable. We just want to make sure that, we let them know that as a volunteer, in addition to the work that they're doing, they're part of the organization and they're representing the organization. And then at the end, we want to thank them. So we thank them by having a volunteer appreciation party, which we have to do this year. We did that for our conference. Conference volunteers, but it's our way to say thank you. So it's really important that we make it easy for them to volunteer, clear instructions, they know what to do if things don't work, and we say thank you. And then we begin again next year. So it's a continuum. And we end up having a lot of people that come back and serve again year after year.
Great, that's a good summary. That's how I understand it as well. So in terms of committees, we have approximately a dozen committees here at CPF, and all told, between all of the committees, there's 50 plus volunteers every year who help us with each of these committees, some of whom are trustees who represent or chair the committees. And you'll see the list of committees here listed on the left-hand side, but if you're ever interested in joining any of these committees, you can go to the website link on the bottom of the page there. Now, earlier in the year, I developed a volunteer management and retention plan, and it's something that, I think has guided at least me personally in managing volunteers. So the following slides are sort of bullet points and general guidelines on how to, first with recruitment, how to properly recruit volunteers. Cindy, I'm not sure if there's any other websites that you use, but we typically use Volunteer Match when we recruit volunteers. Do you have any other sources that you think would be good tips for people here on how to recruit volunteers?
Well, going online and just doing a search under nonprofit volunteers is a good place to start, and look for guidelines, sign-up sheets. That's usually what I do. There's also organizations like the volunteer centers, where you can get some information. There's groups like Compass Point that has a lot of information for nonprofits. There's a wealth of information out there on all aspects of nonprofit management, including volunteers.
Great. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention here is CPF sometimes, though not often, has interns or provides internships. And these are very limited positions. We usually don't take on more than 1 or 2 interns a year. And usually it occurs through the university. Most frequently for us, it's San Francisco State University. And you'll see there on the left-hand side is James, a previous intern of ours, who helped us out with a lot of social media. But I think the general guideline I wanted to point out here when it comes to interns is just to be careful even as a nonprofit, when you take on an intern who is unpaid. And unfortunately, because we're a nonprofit with a very lean budget, we're unable to pay our interns, but we provide in other ways. And I will mention the court case that occurred that was finally decided in 2016, but it was a court case that went all the way back to 2011 against Fox Searchlight Pictures. The company apparently violated the Fair Labor Standards Act by not paying interns and having them do menial tasks like grabbing coffee, making copies. And when interns come here to CPF, we don't make them do those kinds of things, especially as interns. We provide an educational experience for them. At the end of this presentation, you'll have a link that has the 7 guidelines provided by the Department of Labor. I will very briefly go over these. I know we're running short on time here, but there's 7 guidelines. And many of them deal with the extent to which the intern understands the expectations and compensation, and that the internship is an educational experience that benefits the intern just as much, if not more, than the organization. And so at the end of the presentation, you can look up these 7 guidelines and make sure that if you're a nonprofit or other organization that's interested in having unpaid interns, ensure that you're following each of those guidelines. Now, just as an aside, though we can't pay here at CPF, we always provide a free lunch. I know there's the old adage, there's never a free lunch, but for us, we do give lunches to our volunteers. And it's our way of saying, one of our many ways of saying thank you. And as I was searching for listings for CPF online, I found a book excerpt that actually mentioned us. So I won't read it here, but it was interesting to see our name in an actual published book where it said, I'll read a short passage, but it's actually somebody saying, interested in volunteering for CPF, and she says to the person talking to her, except I want that to be my career, not just a weekend hobby. I already signed up with CPF, with the California Preservation Foundation, as a volunteer. They were thrilled to get an architect. And then the response was, I'll bet you do realize, don't you, that the whole point of being a volunteer is that you work for free. And we don't think of volunteers that way here. We think of volunteers as critical parts of the team. And in many ways, it's a great networking experience. And we gather together some of the best experts in the state in terms of historic preservation. And it really is a learning experience for all volunteers. Another thing we want to ensure is that, especially when it comes to our speakers, that we're fair and provide a very diverse range of speakers who come from a variety of backgrounds. And for me, as program manager, as field services director, I make, as much as I'm able to, special efforts to recruit volunteer speakers who provide all sorts of perspectives. And that includes perspectives from speakers who come from underrepresented communities and who have backgrounds that enrich the content of the program. And we very quickly, one of our trustees asked what the gender breakdown was for our speakers. And so I looked into the numbers, and we're relatively fair, although I think we should have more female speakers. So we, over the past 3 years, we've had 753 speakers. And of those 753 speakers, 52% were male and 48 were female. So it's relatively balanced, though, I'd like that to be at least 50-50. It's always an ongoing effort. Now, when it comes to management, I won't go through these one by one. But I think in terms of management, and maybe Cindy has a few things to mention about management of volunteers, but I think the critical thing is just to be sure that volunteers are given clear guidelines, clear instructions, regular communications, checking in frequently, and making sure that we're responsive to volunteers, and make sure that we schedule things at a time when we're available to work with them. So anything else you'd like to mention on that side? Oh, you're muted.
Okay, thanks. No, that's it. But there was a question that came in about board information that we give to the board. I would just like to say that this really is the model from the board on down to the volunteer that comes into the office to help. It's really clear or important that there's clarity on what the expectation is, and we do that with our board. They too are volunteers, so we have a board manual that we give them that details all the expectations, the various committees, the way that they can help, and what's expected of them. And there's forms that they have to sign: conflict of interest, code of ethics, like a loyalty type of a thing, yeah. But we have all this in a document that we give them before they even commit to coming on the board, to make sure that they're very clear. And it's true, again, with every volunteer, that there's clarity on what's expected of them. We do not like to bring in volunteers, even to work in the office, unless we have something for them to do, and it's got to fit with their interests. And as John said, we don't want to bring in someone who's seeking to enhance their career or the education in a particular area and have them stuff envelopes. We want to make sure that there's some real purpose and value in what they're doing.
Great. And so the third and final part of this management plan that I've sort of written up for myself, which you'll have a link to that later if you want to use it as a template, is retention. And this sort of follows on management. I think Cindy mentioned that we have volunteer appreciation parties every year, and usually that follows the conference. And that's one way to retain the interest and continued involvement of volunteers. And it's our one time of the year that we're able to thank them. So we usually have that between, June to August. I hope I'm right on those dates. And it follows the conference. And then finally, and some of these things we're not perfect at. In fact, we often make mistakes ourselves as well. We're imperfect like most people. But here are some rules that I've sort of learned in my experience. One is to always acknowledge and thank volunteers, which we've mentioned before. Second is to give volunteers the opportunity to choose those tasks that most interest them. Third is to plan ahead and set dates early, and that's critical for volunteers because they too have a schedule. Many of them are working. They're trying to fit this in with the rest of their commitments, and they want clear guidelines on when we expect them to be somewhere and what times. Fourth is to provide documentation and guidelines when necessary. And then finally, and always, be responsive as often and quickly as is feasible. And I blame this on myself because the email was addressed to me. But here's a review online for our unresponsiveness. It says, I reached out to the California Preservation Foundation for a volunteer opportunity they had listed, writing quiz questions for online video modules. My first few interactions were great. They replied quickly and were very friendly. I spoke with someone on the phone about the opportunity, and they sent over some materials for me to review prior to getting started. And then after that, radio silence. I believe this was during our conference, so we were trying to juggle multiple things at once, which we're not always good at. Or I'm not always good at. But in the end, we ended up with a 1-star review. And that's me responding to that. So we learned from our mistakes, and following that comment about mistakes, I'm providing some resources here for all of you to turn to. If you take a look at the Department of Labor guidelines I mentioned earlier, you'll see the 7 guidelines there. There's a few other articles on how to be effective volunteer coordinators and 3 R's of volunteer management. So any final comments, Cindy? Great.
I don't have any. I've got to run. I've got some folks waiting for me. So
okay. Well,
thank you.
Liz and I will handle the questions. Thanks for making the time today.
You bet. Thank you.
All right. Bye. Okay. So I think Cindy addressed the question earlier about board members signing a commitment form. And I think she said that they do. They have clear guidelines. They have documentation that they start with when they're onboarded to the board. Are there any other additional questions, either for Liz or CPF? Oh, and I didn't realize my video was off.
Oh.
My bad.
Yeah. I like a lot of what you and Cindy were saying is pretty much in the guidelines that we follow as well. So the recruitment is huge, working nationally and it's often in remote areas. For us, it's recruiting folks that want to go to these remote areas. It requires not just marketing locally, but also building on a culture of volunteers that we have. A lot of it is ensuring retention. So volunteers will come back over and over again and will follow Historicorps to projects around the country. So for us, that has been really important, and also a huge challenge is just the recruitment.
Great. I'm now pasting a survey link while questions come in. So as we're answering these questions, please visit that link and leave us feedback on today's program and any additional comments on what other programs you'd like to see. Liz, you're probably looking at the same questions that I'm looking at here. We'll start with you in terms of asking this question about, are there any ideas or resources for organizing field survey volunteers?
Yeah, so for field survey volunteers, that is something, I mean, a lot of it depends for me on your goals. Why do you want to use volunteers? And that can be a very, very easy question to answer, of course. And then partnering with the local resources and community leaders wherever you're working. So I frequently will reach out to our project partner, and sometimes that's going to be the Forest Service archaeologist or a local foundation, a local school even. So whoever is currently there and established in a community or in a region, and asking them to help me reach the right people that we need. So am I answering your question? No, I've forgotten it.
Yeah, you are. And we also have had speakers cover some of these resources. We had Kara Brunzel, who did a survey under a certified local government grant. And if anybody, I'm sure many of you in on the call today know what the certified local government program is, but the CLG program, as it's known, offers a limited grants of, I believe, $30,000 to $60,000, which nowadays would probably make it 1/10 of the way if you were to pay professionals to do a survey of a city, especially large-scale historic resource surveys. Kara Brunzel did a presentation for us on managing a survey process for the city of Davis, California, which benefited from a CLG grant. And she mobilized something like 20 or 30 volunteers, I think, who all went out into the field and collected basic information about historic resources in a modern, I guess it would be a mid-century modern tract. Not a Eichler tract, but I forget the name of the company that did it. But we could probably send you resources for that as well if you're interested. There was a second question that came in for you, Liz. Is your team available for restoration skills training on urban sites or any public lands?
Yeah, we have over the past 2 years or so now, we have been working in urban sites with more diverse partners. So not only with Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, so on and so forth. For example, just this morning, I released the Bostwick House project, which is in Bladensburg, Maryland, right outside of DC. It's easily accessible by public transit. Last year, we were doing a couple of projects in Petersburg, Virginia, which is south of Richmond. Earlier this year, we worked in Glendora, actually, just outside of LA. So we do urban projects. However, we are challenged by them. A lot of our brand is the great outdoors and sleep under the stars, and enjoy, meals around a campfire and sharing stories. And that's a lot of our brand. And that doesn't really translate over into an urban context. So we are actually working very hard in terms of our marketing and recruitment to figure out how we can always adapt and grow our brand and what volunteers expect of us when they join us on a project. So, and that's reaching into new markets, finding new volunteers. Are people interested in more urban projects? Are they going to be more folks who are already in the preservation community, or are they students and are general public volunteers? Do they want to go to Grand Teton National Park and do more of the vacation thing? Do we have to alter our schedule? So all of these questions start coming up. But yes, we do urban sites. And if you look on our website, actually, I'll send the link here in the chat. I actually have a map and calendar, which is coming here. So you can look on our interactive map and calendar to determine where a project is and what might fit your interest or skills.
Great. And it is now, well, we're 1 minute behind. So if there's any final questions, we'll take one more question, and we can all, I'm sure Liz or I or Cindy can answer by email. And she just pasted the link that she mentioned in the chat box if you'd like that. I'm also going to paste below that our survey once more. With that being said, do you have any final words of wisdom, Liz?
Let your volunteers tell you what they want and build your program around that. You're going to have a lot more success, and rather than trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. So I'm always in communication with my volunteers, and I hope that all of you volunteer with us.
Thank you, and thanks for your time today.
Absolutely, thank you.
So what we're going to do, I'm going to turn off my video. Liz can turn off hers if she'd like. And then I will leave the window open just so you can, you have plenty of time to respond to the survey or visit the link, the resource links that we've provided here. If you have any other questions, don't hesitate to email me or Liz or Cindy, and enjoy the rest of the day. And as a reminder, we do have a part 3 to this webinar, which you will be receiving at no extra cost because this is a shorter program than was initially expected. So there will be a part 3 that will be about an hour in length, and I believe it's in July. It might be early August, but I will send out more details on that by email later. So thanks again, and have a wonderful day.